We here at Habits by Republica had the privilege to witness a conversation with Dr. Gabor Maté, one of the great thinkers of our time. Our friend, Romanian psychotherapist Gabriel Cicu, invited Dr. Maté to take part in a dialogue about generational trauma, new ways of healing, modern stress, and about what is normal. In the next few minutes, we have the pleasure to present you the biggest conclusions and lessons we've learned from their conversation. Enjoy!
Hello, Gabor. Welcome to this conversation. Let me tell to our friends that we didn't see each other face to face for 3 years now. So I'm very happy and anxious to have this conversation with you. I would like to start with a little context. We first met back in 2018, and at that time you invited me to a very special program in the Amazonian rainforest. So I have to confess that it was a very powerful and life-changing program for me.
That was in 2019, and that was in the Amazon jungle in Peru. And it was at a place called the Temple of the Way of Light, which is a facility where they do ceremonies with indigenous native healers from the Shipibo nation, one of the indigenous people in Peru. And the ceremonies were with this plant called ayahuasca, which is really 2 plants mixed together. It's a brew that you drink, and it can give you some very powerful, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, but always very instructive and deep experiences. And I was going to lead that retreat, and you were there along with 23 other colleagues from all over the world, all health professionals, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, and so on. And I was going to lead this. And as you know, we had the first ceremony where I worked with your group for 1 day. That evening there was the ceremony. There were 6 shamans. There were 24 of us in the Malacca, which is the building where the ceremony is held. Each of the maestros and the maestras came to each of us 1 time to chant to us. So each of us participants had 6 chants directed at us. And at any one time in the Malacca, there were 6 chants going on at the same time. And these chants are, of course, they're very mystical and very beautiful. I didn't have any kind of a deep experience, and I often don't, even though I lead these retreats. My own experiences are often somewhat distant. So these shamans sent a delegation to me next morning, and they said, "We can't work with you in the ceremony because you are filled with too much dark energy. And that affects our chanting, and it affects how we work with other people." So basically, they fired me from my own retreat. People had paid all this money to come from all over the world to work with me, and all of a sudden, they're telling me I can't do it. What they did is they offered me to have private ceremonies every second night, while you guys, the rest of you, the other 5 of them, one of the 6 was going to work with me. The other 5 was going to work with the rest of you guys. What they said was, the problem was that, no, they didn't know who I was. They didn't know my name. I mean, they may know my name, but that's all they knew. They didn't know doctor, internationally respected author and speaker and all this stuff. They also didn't know about my childhood, which is being a Jewish infant under the Nazis in Budapest in 1944. But here's what they said. They said, "We sense that you've worked with so much trauma in your life, so many traumatized people, and you've absorbed their traumas and stresses, and you haven't cleared it out of yourself. That's why your energy is so dark." And they also said, "We think that when you were very small, you had a big scare, and you haven't got over it yet." They knew nothing about me.
And it was true.
It was totally true. So I isolated myself. I stayed on my own. I did yoga. I did meditation. I walked in the rainforest. And every second night I had a ceremony. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what happened for me, except to say that on the fifth ceremony, I had a huge experience. A huge experience. Just opened me right up. And I write about this in my new book, by the way, this whole experience. What they also said to me afterwards is that when they heard that a group of healthcare providers, doctors and so on, are coming, they thought they'd have an easy job, because they said to me, we work with traumatized people all the time and we absorb their energies, but we cleared out of ourselves. And we thought you medical people will do the same thing. But no, they said, you came here, we've never met with such a heavy, dark bunch.
I remember that. They told us, they asked us how you can cure and help people when you have so much darkness in yourself.
Exactly. So that's what they picked up about me, and that's what they picked up about the rest of you as well. That's where we met. That was the contact.
Exactly. But that's after that, for me and for you for sure, because I hear you speaking about that after that. It's a very powerful change in the paradigms, in the health paradigm, can I say? Because I know I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a psychoanalyst, but I've never speak before in terms of healing. You know, we used to term, you are a medical doctor also, and we used to use the term cure. No, diagnostic. We have a diagnostic, we have a treatment, and we have a cure. But this, for me, it was a very powerful changing in the paradigm in terms of healing.
Actually, I would say that in the psychiatric realm, they don't even talk about cure. They don't talk about healing at all. But they don't even talk about cure, because they have no idea how to cure depression or bipolar illness or ADHD or psychosis. They can control the symptoms is what they can do. So they're not even talking about cure so much as symptom control. Healing is not even on their radar. That's, in my new book, I talk a lot about the whole psychiatric paradigm of even the concept mental disease. You have to understand, it's only one way of talking about a phenomenon. So there's the phenomenon,
and we put the etiquette.
Yeah, there's the actual experience that people have of low mood or suicidality or hallucinations or voices
or pain
or emotional pain or dissociation. There's the experience that people have. Then there's the diagnosis of mental illness. That's only one way of looking at that experience. And we being doctors, we want to fit everything into a medical paradigm, as you say.
Exactly.
There's other ways of looking at it. The other way to look, for example, I have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and one of my books is on that subject. I know it's been published in Romania. So people say, I have ADHD, attention deficit, I have it. But is that true, that language? Think about it. I have a cell phone. I can put down the cell phone. I can pick up the cell phone. I can throw it away. It's a thing that's separate from me. When I say I have ADHD or I have depression, is that a thing separate from me? Or is that a process that's happening inside me? Obviously, it's not a thing that's separate, that somehow entered me. It's a process inside me. How did that process arise inside me? That arose because of my life, of what happened to me as a small child, what kind of life I've led as an adult. Now, most psychiatrists don't understand that. They think of these things as things that people have, but they don't know how to ask many questions about the kind of life that person has had that maybe will explain why that process is active inside them. Now, if you start asking, how did this process arise inside you, and you have to look at people's lives, maybe then you can help people heal. Maybe it can help people address that process in a positive, active, intuitive way. That's very different from here's a pill, take this and call me in 2 weeks. And by the way, I have nothing against pills, but they don't deal with the underlying process. They just suppress the symptoms.
When you talk about process, no, in fact, there are feelings. No, there are our feelings that we feel. We feel sadness. We feel happiness. We used to put these feelings in 2 boxes. You know, negative feelings and positive feelings. And negative feelings we have to, you know, to give some medication and then throw away. You know, no, if they are not good. Yeah. What you said, what we learn in the Shipibo people, that they're what you said about that.
Well, you know, when I talk about process, I may be talking about feelings, but I'm not necessarily talking about feelings, because sometimes the problem is people don't even know what they feel.
That's okay.
Like feeling is something that you feel, that you're aware of. But a lot of people, for example, had a lot of anger, but they don't feel the anger. Why don't they feel the anger? Because as children, they were not allowed to. So they had to push it down, repress it, push it down so much, they don't even know they're angry. By the way, what is the word when we push something down? What do we call that? We call that in English, depressing. To depress something is to push it down. Mm-hmm. So you got in depression is not a feeling of anger, but just a mood that's alienated and bored and kind of, it's painful, but you're not even feeling the real feeling.
Okay. So how we get to feel the feeling?
That's where professional help comes in. But you do it. Now, first of all, the feelings tend to show up in a way in people's lives, but they don't know what the feelings are about. So very often people might feel anger because of the bus was 5 minutes late. And they don't know what that they're really feeling is their hurt and disappointment as a child, that their needs were not met. But all of a sudden, you know, the bus was late. This is terrible. You know, you have, you know. No, it's about what happened to you as a kid. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the feelings sometimes show up sideways. They show up unexpectedly. And then sometimes you have to really talk to people and ask them about their childhoods and what happened to them. And then the feelings, if people feel safe. See, the reason the feelings were suppressed in the first place at age 2 or 3 is because it wasn't safe to feel them. Because if I get angry, mommy won't like me. And I can't have mommy not like me, because then I don't survive. So I'm going to push them, not consciously, unconsciously, I'm going to push them my feelings. Because I didn't feel safe. Now, if they come and talk to you or me or anybody and they feel safe, now that safety gives them permission to feel whatever is there. So what people need to be fully in touch with their feelings, they need safety, emotional safety.
How you can describe safeness in this moment of the world, you know, in this moment of the, how you call it? We know that in our office of psychotherapy, you know, we know the name and what this concept of safeness it is. Yeah. But what is safeness in nowadays?
Well, look, there was never absolute safety in the world. I mean, at any time you could be hit by a lightning, killed by an earthquake, hit by a bus. You know, so there's no absolute safety. Okay. And in some places in the world, like Eastern Europe,
where we are,
like we're seeing right now again, there's all kinds of historical danger. You know, whether you're Romanian or Hungarian or Serb or Croat or Ukrainian or Russian, Pole, Czech, I mean, there's just always so much turmoil going on. But when I talk about safety, I don't mean an absolute safety. I mean, I come to your office and I sense that you're going to accept me. You're not going to judge me. You're not going to reject me. You're going to be curious about me. You're going to have some compassion for me. You're here to help me. So safety is not just the absence of a threat. It's also the presence of contact. So when I'm talking about safety in this sense, I'm talking about that contact.
That's another big question for you that I have in my mind. What's the humanism in these days? What's the contact of the people in these days? Because what I feel in the rainforest, that's what it was very healing for me, the feel of contact with others, with nature. I knew it before, rationally, but I didn't feel, you know what I mean. But what's the contact now?
Well, so here's the thing. This is where you have to look at human nature. So how we evolved as human beings was millions of years of contact with people very close to us. Small band hunter-gatherers. Everybody was together. Selfishness was unknown because it threatened the whole tribe. It was all about what we can do for the whole unit. Support each other, look after each other, give to each other. If you look at traditional cultures, they do a lot of giving. They don't do a lot of demanding and competition with each other. They do a lot of giving. That's their culture. That's because that's how we evolved. So basically today we have a culture that goes very much against human nature. Now, human nature exists, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be realized. For example, if I had you know what an acorn is? An acorn? The acorn is, now what's the nature of the acorn? What is the acorn supposed to become? It's supposed to become an oak tree. You plant the acorn in the ground, it's going to grow up to be a big oak tree. So that's the nature of the acorn, is to become an oak tree. But what happens if you put the acorn on my desk? Is it going to become an oak tree?
No.
No. Why not? Because even though it's its nature, that nature needs the right conditions in order to develop. The same thing with human beings. We have a certain nature, but you put us in an environment that doesn't support that nature, we're going to become distorted. We're going to become not like we're meant to be. And modern civilization, not just modern civilization, but civilization, the more and more we got away from nature, the more we got away from our own human nature. And that's what we have right now. So then, there you are in the rainforest with Aboriginal people who've been living this life for thousands of years.
And they are in connection.
Yeah, and you're who know nature, who know every plant, who speak to every flower, who know how to use every root and every leaf in some medicinal or nutritional way. They're completely, who listen to the trees. They're totally in contact with nature, and they're guiding you. And you're in this amazing environment out there in nature, and you are with other people on the same quest. Now you're back where you're supposed to be in the first place. Naturally, you come alive. Naturally, you feel connected. Naturally, you feel more yourself than you ever have before.
Yeah, Gabor, but we live in the big cities. We don't have the power of curandero around us. We don't have even a tree maybe 1 kilometer by us.
Yeah, that's true. So, and obviously we cannot go back to that way of life. I mean, that's gone. But let me ask you a question. as I'm sitting here on my chair, speaking with you, are you worried that I'm going to float off to the ceiling, that I'm going to start flying? Are you worried about that? Why don't I start floating up to the ceiling like a leaf or like a feather? Why not?
I don't know.
You don't know? Have you heard about gravity?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because of
That's why I want to start floating, because this gravity keeps me here. Okay, now, but let me ask you this question. What if I was sent to the moon? What would happen to me there? I would start floating.
Yeah.
Why? Because the gravity on the moon is not the same as that on Earth. So what do people do when they go to the moon? How do they stay not floating? How do they stay grounded? They wear heavy boots and heavy clothing, right? Because we know that the gravitational force on the moon is much less than that on the Earth. So we can compensate for it, right? Now, modern society has lost a lot of things. We've also gained a lot of things, but in gaining a lot of things, we've lost a lot of things. Now, if we're aware of it, then we can compensate for it. So there might not be a tree within a mile of you, but for God's sakes, your country is full of mountains and forests and valleys and lakes and beautiful places. Take children out there regularly. Human beings should go out there regularly, you know? In your city, Bucharest, these monstrous, huge buildings that
Ceausescu. Yeah.
Jessica built, but tear them down and put up forests. or do something, you know? Because those houses, those large buildings, they're meant to make you feel very small as a human being, but not small as a human being as compared to nature, because we're a part of nature. So if we recognize that we're part of nature, then we don't feel small. But those buildings were meant to make you feel small as compared to the leader, as compared to the authority, you know? So if we know these things, let's build cities where our knowledge is expressed. So it's not a question of having to go back to some old way of life that's impossible, but of, if I'm going to go to the moon, I need to know what conditions I'm going to face there, and I need to compensate for it. In the same way, if we're going to live in modern civilization, we need to know what we've lost, and we need to compensate for it. I mean, and if we're conscious, we can do it. If we're not conscious, we can't do it.
So first of all is to be conscious.
You have to be conscious of what we need and what we've lost, yes.
You said that you make meditation, you made, so that's this kind of things helps.
Everybody needs to find something, you know. Actually, I get more out of swimming than I get out of meditation.
Okay.
But when I'm swimming, I take deep breaths, I blow out, and I do this for 50 minutes. That for me is a kind of calming and meditative process. I come out of the pool feeling very different than when I'm in it. For some people, it's meditation, yoga, nature walks, prayers, singing, chanting, making music, creating art, walking. I mean, whatever it is, you know.
You speak about, I want to ask you, and because in your new book you speak about that, about normality.
So let me tell you a story. This is in my book. Adolf Eichmann was the Nazi lieutenant colonel in the SS who organized the deportations of Jews from all over Eastern Europe, and particularly from Hungary and also Romania to Auschwitz. So he was involved in the killing of millions of people. So, as you know, he was captured, I think, in Argentina, kidnapped by the Israelis and taken to Jerusalem, and he was put on trial. And he was found guilty of crimes against humanity, and he was executed. Now, before his trial, he was examined by several psychiatrists. They all said that he was normal in every way. That one of them said, he's more normal than I am, in his relationship to his family, to his children, to his friends, perfectly normal. So we have, here we have this perfectly normal person killing millions of people. So what is normal? So normal has nothing to do with healthy. Normal just means it's a statistic. If you're in Bucharest, and if everybody in Bucharest tortured their cats, then torturing cats would be perfectly normal. And if you didn't torture cats, you'd be abnormal. So, but here's the mistake that we make. We think that normal is the same as healthy and natural.
Exactly. We in psychiatry, we said, and a lot of time you hear, go to the psychiatrist to get back to the normality.
That's right. And the normality in this culture is pretty sick. So, because this culture is not healthy or natural in many ways. So, that's the myth, that what the norm is also healthy and natural. The other myth is that people with so-called mental illness are abnormal.
Exactly.
But really, like if you're a small child and you're not allowed to be angry and you suppress your anger, you depress it, that's a normal response. So we have this false idea about norm, and we have this false idea of what's abnormal. It's totally backward. It's totally backward. So what I'm saying is that what we call mental illnesses are most of the time normal responses to abnormal situations.
Exactly.
So we have this normal society. Look at what normal society did in 20th century in Europe. Normal people sent other normal people to murder each other. In the First World War, 20 million people were slaughtered. In the Second World War, probably 30 million, maybe 40.
In the communist time, we don't know.
Well, then you have the communist times in Eastern Europe. You grew up under communism. I did in Hungary, and perfectly normal. No, some of these leaders you can't even say they were normal. I mean, Ceausescu, I don't think he would fit anybody's idea of normality. But the people that worked for him and obeyed his orders, they were very normal people. And same all over Eastern Europe.
Do you think we can speak about the trauma of communists in our region? It's very, very clear the trauma of Holocaust. It's very clear the trauma of the wars, the first war, second war. But I feel it in my environment that there are very specific things that look very traumatic, that is very common.
Look, yeah, of course we can. I mean, we can talk about collective trauma.
Exactly.
And when people are suppressed, when they're lied to. And it's very confusing because I grew up a good little communist. I really believed in the system until I was 12 years old. And in 1956, there was the Hungarian Revolution. Then I kind of woke up overnight. But they're telling you that this is for human brotherhood and for justice and freedom. And meanwhile, they're doing all these terrible things that your parents aren't even allowed to talk to you about. Because if they talk to you about it, and if you talk about it, they're going to be in trouble. So it's very confusing, for one thing. It's also, people are very traumatized just by not allowed to speak their truth, by being suppressed. Not to mention being jailed and being tortured and all that, But I'll tell you something interesting. not to mention, then there's specific evils like the orphanages in Romania that everybody's read about, the terrible ways, because they didn't allow abortion. People were giving birth, but because they were so poor, they couldn't look after these children. So tens of thousands of these kids were sent to orphanages under terrible conditions. And we know what the outcome has been. Severe mental health issues amongst these children that were then adopted and brought to the West. And my God, what a disaster, that they had come out of. So there's lots of traumas. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit easy at the same time because, you see, I think most people in Romania or Hungary, they knew they were being lied to. They may not have been able to do anything or to say anything, but did they really believe what they're being told? Probably not. Here in the West, where I live now, the propaganda system is much more sophisticated because people are being lied to all the time here, but they believe it. This is a much better propaganda system than the communists could ever even dream about.
It's more efficient, like to be splitted, and we get more confused and more traumatized, something like that.
There's a lot of trauma and a lot of lies and a lot of confusion here, but people don't know it because the system is so much more efficient in its propaganda.
Now we live in Bucharest. Nowadays, it's the start of the beginning of the war in neighborhood here, no? And it's very triggered to the people especially the people my age or older that remember the communism, the Russian, How you feel that this kind of phenomenon of re-traumatized?
Well, I don't know. What's it like for you?
It's complicated, it's a question that a friend of mine is here asked me what I have to tell to my children to not be traumatized in this moment. No, because we are traumatized, we are triggered, we are somehow minimum aware, but what to say to our children,
But that's the nature of trauma, is that people are reacting to the past and not the present. And that's what it means to be triggered.
Exactly.
If you look at even the word triggered, it's an interesting word. How big a part of the weapon is the trigger? When you have a weapon this big, the trigger is this small. The weapon has ammunition, it has explosive material. What gets triggered is the explosive material in the weapon. Now, when I get triggered, I'm carrying the explosive material. I'm carrying the charge. I could decide to get all upset about the trigger, or I could decide to examine myself and ask, well, what is the explosive material that I haven't resolved yet, that I haven't defused yet? What is the explosive charge that I'm still harboring in my belly and my chest? That's a much more interesting question. So the way you deal with being triggered is when you get triggered, good. Now look at it, examine yourself. What exactly was triggered? What are you still carrying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So look inside.
Looking inside, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, you don't know this, but let me, since we're talking about communism, I'm going to find you a quote here by Karl Marx, okay? And Marx said that self-viewing, self-examination is the first condition of wisdom.
Okay.
Now, how can you disagree with that?
No.
And for me, one of the travesties and tragedies is when you actually read Marx and you read what was done in his name, it's like looking at Jesus Christ and looking at what was done in his name.
Yeah.
So here's Jesus who teaches peace and love and non-judgment and acceptance and absolute compassion. And then you have all these Christian countries murdering each other in the name of their religion. It's very similar to what happened with Marx. If you actually read Marx himself, then you look what was done, it's just like the opposite, you know? It's a very common human phenomenon, actually.
What?
That somebody, some genius puts on a set of ideas, and then they have followers, and the followers do the very opposite. That's what happened with Jesus. That's what happened with a lot of these people. I mean, in almost any religion or ideology. So this is very common.
You mentioned compassion, and you have a very beautiful technique, compassionate inquiry. First of all, I would like to say that inquiry, you know, I have colleagues that make the training with you, but you know, in Romania we have a very nice debate about inquiry because of the trauma of communist inquiry. It's very securitate, you know, it's very. But anyway, but what I want, because the compassion, it's somehow new in our world, coming from the Buddhism, from the other culture. Can you explain what is compassion? What you mean by compassionate inquiry? Yeah. What is compassion? What is compassion?
Well, first of all, inquiry can be compassionate or it cannot be compassionate. So there was I saw a movie once about, there was a place in Hungary called Recsk, and Recsk was a concentration camp or a prison camp for enemies of the communist system. Now, most of these people were not fascists. They were actually socialists because the communists hated the socialists because they were so close in the ideology, but they had a different point of view. So they suppressed so there's all these very experienced anti-fascist, patriotic Hungarian socialists who were kept under terrible conditions and tortured. And actually, many of the guards were former fascists because the communist system knew how to use these people for their own purposes. So I saw this film about a documentary, Hungarian documentary about this prison camp after the fall of, actually before the fall of communism, but after you could talk about these things already in the 1980s. So this one particular writer who was a political prisoner, he said, they didn't inquire with me. And I said to them, look, if you want me to confess to being Adolf Hitler, I'll confess to being Adolf Hitler. Just don't hurt me anymore, you know? So that's one kind of inquiry, you know? But there's no curiosity there. The Securitate, the Stasi, the AVO in Hungary, you know, they already know what they want. They just want the person to say it. They don't care about the truth. They just want a confession. So we're not talking about that kind of inquiry.
Okay. So you speak about truth.
So first of all, we're talking about genuine curiosity. We want to find out the truth, not so we can use it against the person, but so that the person can help themselves. So curiosity, genuine curiosity. And curiosity says, I don't know, but I want to find out. Because, well, Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will liberate you. So we're asking questions out of curiosity to help liberate that person. Liberate them from what? From their trauma. So that's the curiosity part. That's the inquiry part. Compassion, well, it comes from a Latin word, two Latin words. One is to suffer and the other is with. So compassion means to suffer with somebody. That doesn't mean that you have the same suffering as they do, but you appreciate that they're suffering and you don't want them to suffer. So you're present with their suffering.
So it's intention, you have an intention.
You care. And that's a very human trait. Most of us are capable of that. Some people who have been badly hurt, sociopaths, presidents of countries, presidents of big corporations, they don't have much of it. They're quite capable of killing a lot of people for the power of their profit. But most people are capable of compassion.
You mean that compassion is something natural, human?
It is natural to human. It's even natural to rats, actually. We can see this in a laboratory. Now,
so we don't have to go to a monastery in Tibet to stay 7 years to discover it. Or maybe yes, but it's inside us.
It develops naturally in little children who are treated well.
Okay.
It develops naturally, very early, if they're treated well. No, but it's not enough. If I see you suffering, it's good that I should care about that, but it's not enough. So there's a second level of compassion, which I call the compassion of curiosity, or the compassion of inquiry, where you actually, you're suffering. I care about that, so I need to find out why you're suffering. So let's say you're a drug addict and you're suffering, and I care about that, but that's not enough. I need to know, why are you suffering? Well, you're suffering because you were traumatized and you're trying to escape the pain of the trauma. Otherwise, I might think that you're just stupid or making a bad decision, or you're morally, ethically deficient. But if I understand that your addiction comes out of your suffering, well, now that deepens my compassion.
So it's not judging.
It's not judging. No, it's curious. Yeah. Now, there's other levels of compassion. I don't want to go through them all right now, but an important one is what I call the compassion of recognition, which is that, let's say you're working with somebody who's addicted. If you're honest with yourself, most of the time you'll recognize that you're not that different. You may not be as extreme as they are. You may not be suffering as much. Maybe you didn't have as much trauma. Or maybe you worked out your trauma, but they haven't yet. But you recognize in yourself. So when I was working with a heavily addicted population in Vancouver's downtown east side, here in British Columbia, I could see in myself everything I saw in my clients. I was just luckier than they were. That's all. That was the only difference. So compassion has different layers.
Another thing that I found in rainforest, it's there are concepts of calling, of aligning, living in aligning life. Do you find your calling there?
So I've been a medical doctor since I was 33 years old, and that was a calling for me. I mean, there's something called me that I wanted to help humanity. I wanted to help in the health field, but that's not all there was. I was also driven. I was a workaholic. I worked too much. I took on too much. I neglected my own needs. That's what the people in the rainforest found out about me. Sometimes I neglected my family for the sake of working. That's not a calling. So what we're talking about here is the difference between being called and being driven.
The driven is right from the ego, we can say.
No, driven from the inside.
Okay.
Because maybe I don't feel that I'm important enough. So now I have to work all the time to make myself important. Or maybe as a Jewish baby, I got the message, which I did, that the world didn't want me. Well, then I'm going to work really hard to make sure that the world needs me. You know, so that I'm going to be a workaholic. So these are internal drives. Insofar as I'm controlled by these drives, I am not free. So the calling is legitimate. Being driven is unconscious and it's trauma-based.
Can the people, ourselves, be part of the changing of the humanity? It could be that not me and you. We like a human being.
I think every human being can make that decision for themselves as to how they're going to live their lives and what contribution they're going to make and what kind of conversations they're going to have. And when they have those conversations, are they being curious and compassionate, or are they full of driven, compulsive rage and hatred? You know, these are conversations, these are decisions we can all make for ourselves. And I can't make a prescription for anybody else. I just know what it takes to be true to myself. And I think that's the decision we all need to make.
Gabor, thank you very much for this beautiful conversation. So, if we find our calling and live in alignment with this, in integrity with our true self, we can face any stress and situation. We, like human beings, as well as the world, need compassion. Stay in compassion. Thank you, Gabor.
Yeah, thank you.
Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit, sperăm că v-a fost de folos și vă invităm în comunitatea noastră a Societății Omului Sănătos.